On to today's topic, sustainable food options. Jerusha Klemperer is the director of foodprint.org, and she'll be providing us an in-depth overview of the drivers for sustainable food purchasing and dining out choices. For about a decade, Jerusha has been a communication strategist working towards a more sustainable, healthy, and delicious food system. Prior to foodprint.org, she was the co-founder and communications director at Food Corps, an AmeriCorps service organization. Just a quick word about MarketMen for those of you that might be learning about us for the first time today. MarketMen is a cloud-based restaurant inventory management and purchasing system that provides restaurants complete control of back-of-house operations. The platform also includes features surrounding waste, reporting, all different sorts of things that help operators understand patterns, trends, and how to prevent waste from happening. This webinar series, as well as other initiatives taken by our company, are meant to provide restaurant operators with information that can assist them in leading more sustainable businesses. Without further ado, Jerusha, take it away.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. As you just heard, my name's Jerusha, and I'm here on behalf of Foodprint. We are a consumer-facing website that helps people understand how to make food choices that do less harm to the environment, to animals, and to people. And that means we give them resources for how to shop, cook, and eat more sustainably. So today I'll be talking with you about what diners are looking for, everything from food produced without pesticides to food that was produced with animal welfare in mind, and a host of other issues, and how you can both procure food that meets those values and also how you can convey to your customers how your food is meeting those values. So a lot of this has to do with labels, understanding certain terms and labels yourselves, and then authentically and meaningfully conveying that information to your customers. So, sorry, I see what's happening here. Really sorry. I am trying this. Is a problem. I'm so sorry. I cannot get to my clicker. There we go. Okay. So a little bit about why we call it a food print. We want people to see that the impact of our food system is greater than just a carbon footprint. That impact includes an impact on the welfare of the animals involved, impact on water quality, soil health, human health, public health, community health. It's a holistic picture, and that holistic impact is a food print. And when we launched the site about a year ago, we decided to get a baseline for what consumers care about when it comes to their food. So we conducted a survey of household shoppers, 1,000 of them, and we learned a lot of interesting and surprising things. So some of these are about shopping and some are about dining out. There were lessons there for us, and I'm pretty sure that there are lessons here for you too as restaurant owners and managers. So one big important thing that we learned is that people have values connected to their food, and that those values are driving the decisions that they make, whether at the supermarket or in restaurants. Now, whether or not they're getting good, clear, authentic information to make those decisions is a totally other story, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they are driven by those values, and they want their food to reflect those values. So let's dig in. Here's what we asked. We asked them, when you're shopping for your food, which of the following influence your purchasing decisions? So this is what we learned, and I was very surprised by how high some of these numbers were. So 66.5% of them were driven by wanting local seasonal fruits and vegetables. 37.7% were driven by wanting food from healthy farms that don't pollute the environment. 37.7% driven by wanting meat or chicken from farms where animals are raised on natural diets, and we'll talk a little bit about natural later, in natural conditions. 36.5% driven by wanting meat or chicken from farms where animals were treated well with standards for their living conditions. 28.2% driven by wanting food from farms where workers have fair pay, healthy conditions, and fair treatment. I was surprised by the high number on that one. 23.3% driven by wanting organic food, and 17.9% driven by wanting food that's from local farmers markets or CSAs. Now, when we asked them about dining out, we phrased it, how important are the following issues to you? We gave them a bunch of options, and we learned that they're also driven by those values when dining out. 67% said they wanted food where workers were treated fairly. 66% said they look for restaurants that offer options for food raised without drugs. 62.7% want food from animals raised on a natural diet. 60% said they wanted food at their restaurant to be produced locally. And 60% wanted food where the animals were treated humanely. Now, the answers to these questions really struck me, mainly because I felt that a lot of consumers probably have no idea if any of these values are being met when they dine out. So they care about these issues in a very abstract sense, but there is likely an information gap between what they hope is happening and then what's actually happening at the restaurants where they're eating. So in order to test that theory out, we ask questions about labels, what consumers hope those labels mean, what they expect them to mean, and unsurprisingly, there's a lot of confusion. So this graphic here highlights 3 areas where we saw confusion, though there were many more. So we asked them what certain labels currently mean and what they think they should mean. So when it comes to the organic label, we saw something really strange. 49.5% of respondents said that when it comes to food choices, they try to avoid pesticides. But you might remember from that other slide, only 23% of them are looking for organic food. Now, organic food is food that was produced without pesticides. So there's a strange disconnect there. The term free range, 84.2% of respondents think that the free range label should mean that animals had access to the outdoors at all time, right? They're ranging around, they're free ranging. But in reality, free range means that animals had some access to the outdoors, but what that is and for how long is absolutely not defined. When it comes to animal welfare, they think that if meat, eggs, and dairy have a label on them that say raised humanely, that should mean that the claims are verified, which is understandable that people would assume that or want that. Unfortunately, those words, raised humanely, along with a whole bunch of other words that I'm going to talk about later, can be used without certification. You can get that claim verified by certain labels like an animal welfare approved label or a certified humane label, but you can just say raised humanely and it doesn't mean that it's certified. So, and we're going to talk more about that, this difference between labels and terms. There's a lot of labels that food producers and also restaurants can put on their food and they don't have to back it up, and those are terms. Then there are labels that are third-party verified or certified, and I'm calling those labels, and those are labels that have meaning. More on that to come. Okay. So this is what we learned. People are looking for labels that can connect them to food that meets their values. But given how many unverified claims and labels there are on things, there's a lot of confusion for them, and I'm guessing probably for you too. But the good news is there are labels out there that are meaningful, labels that tell us when food was produced with fewer drugs and fewer pesticides, and when it was produced with better animal and worker welfare. So I'm going to spend a little time now going through 4 different types of products and touching on some of the most important labels and terms and how you can better understand them, all with the hope that it's going to make you more informed buyers, and then you can help your customers be better informed consumers. Just a note that foodprint.org has a food label guide on our site where we break down what each and every label tells you or doesn't tell you, and what criteria to look for depending on what matters most to you. And the information that I'm sharing today in this presentation reflects what's in that label guide. So you're going to start to notice some themes, especially around animal agriculture, and that's that we're really fans of pasture-raised and grass-fed and things that are certified as such. So you'll start to see that come up. So first up, let's talk about eggs. When it comes to eggs, there are a few labels and terms you hear a lot. You hear cage-free, organic, pasture-raised, free-range. We're going to break some of those down. So up at the top here, you see I've got terms. And that's, if you remember from before, these are things that you can put on your packaging and they don't have to be certified. And then down below, we've got labels. So none of these terms up here are verified or third-party certified. These include natural, humane, pasture-raised. Another one is hormone-free, which is totally misleading since chickens are raised without growth hormones in the first place. So that's one of those kind of unnecessary labels, kind of bragging about something that nobody's doing anyway. Then there's the funny matter of a term like vegetarian fed, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen on egg cartons. Chickens are not vegetarians. As many of you might know, they eat bugs and worms, and a truly pasture-raised animal is not going to be vegetarian fed, and it's going to make the hen healthier, and it will make their eggs healthier to eat. So take that label with a grain of salt. I also have here a bunch of certified labels, and I've included a couple that Foodprint thinks have the most meaning and integrity, and I'll explain a little bit about why. And those are the USDA organic label, the animal welfare approved label, and the Demeter certified biodynamic label. Those are top picks for Foodprint. A couple of notes about the organic label. So the thing to realize with organic, whether it's eggs or milk or meat, is that its largest focus is around pesticides and environmental stewardship. So for eggs, that means really strong standards for environmental sustainability. You know, that the feed for the animals is 100% organically produced, no synthetic fertilizers or industrial pesticides, no GMOs. The animals cannot be given any antibiotics or other drugs, and that's all fantastic. But on the animal welfare front, organic is not as strong as some other labels. And so you'll see this label come up for us a bunch. The animal welfare approved label is really the gold standard in terms of marrying environmental standards and animal welfare standards. It's a hard label to find. It's a hard thing to get certified for because it's a really high standard, but it is the one that we think is the best. When it comes to animal welfare labels, you can also look for the certified humane label, which is more common, slightly lower standards, but it has animal welfare at the forefront, and it's on products that you can find at the supermarket, for example, and that probably are on your procurement lists. But what you're already starting to see, just looking at eggs, and it's what we try to tell consumers as we educate them. In some cases, you have to decide what matters to you most. Is it animal welfare? Is it keeping pesticides out of a food system? Or is it worker welfare, which, by the way, the organic standards don't address at all. Another thing I want to bring up is just a little reality checking around the term cage-free. And by the way, I'm digging really deep on eggs, and then I think some of these issues will be covered by the other products as well. But cage-free and the fact that it got codified into law in California and really shifted the market and therefore production is in many ways a move in the right direction. And it was a direct result of consumers demanding cage-free eggs. But cage-free hens don't actually have a very good life. They're generally in such crowded conditions that it can be really stressful for them. They don't have any space to move around. So we generally say that eggs from pasture-raised hens are the way to go, but of course they need to be certified as such. So you can't just rely on these words being on the carton. We actually, if you really want to dig deep on eggs and nerd out, we've got a 25-page report on egg production on our site. And we have that actually for a bunch of products, including beef and chicken. And this is a graphic that we produced along with that report. And it just gives you a sense of some of what we're doing on our site, trying to help people really be able to access very quickly what's what. And you'll see that we put at the top, the gold standard is pasture-raised eggs. And down below, you can see how cage-free hens and caged hens have a lot of the same red boxes there. Just cage-free hens have a couple of green boxes. And that gives you a sense of how they're only different in very small ways. Anyway, moving us along, because we only have limited time here, to beef. A conversation that, as you know, is largely dominated when it comes to labels by debates around grass-fed or grass-finished or grain-finished, things like that. So we'll touch on some of that. Up top, you see three terms. You see three terms, meaning they're things you can put on your packaging without verification, and that's grass-fed, natural, and pasture-raised. Now, in our food label guide, our top picks are all certified grass-fed beef labels, emphasis on certified. Once again, each of these grass-fed beef labels, and that's the ones on the left there, certified grass-fed, NOFA New York certified 100% grass-fed, and PCO certified 100% grass-fed. Each of them require that at a minimum, the cattle were raised on pasture, they ate a grass-based diet without any grain at all, without any unnecessary drugs, and the animals were never confined and raised only on pasture. So with no synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. So there are companies who call their meat grass-fed without official certification or verification, and they don't necessarily meet those same standards and might only pertain to just the feed being grass. So their cows might be in confinement inside year-round, but being given hay, which is, dried grass, but none of the other criteria being met. So something to look out for. I added the organic label into this slide just to talk about it, but it is pretty different than the grass-fed products. The organic label, once again, really strong standards for environmental sustainability, only so-so on animal welfare, and doesn't incorporate grass at all. At Foodprint, we feel really strongly that grass is better for animals. It's what these animals were designed to eat. They are ruminants, and better for the planet to have more healthy pasture and less industrially produced corn and soy, which is grown for animal feed. So moving along to chicken, where it's all about free range and antibiotic free. I'm sure those are sounding familiar to you. So up top, you see those terms, right? There's a few terms that companies slap on chicken that aren't very meaningful. So something to keep in mind. Chickens raised for meat are never raised in cages, and they're never given hormones. So writing cage-free on poultry, on chicken you're gonna eat, as opposed to hens or layers for eggs, or labeling them hormone-free doesn't mean anything. Some other words like natural and humane also have no legal definition. This is true for natural across the board on all products. They're not verified by third-party inspectors. You can basically ignore labels like that as far as we're concerned. The labels with the most meaning are the ones that let you know that the animals were raised on pasture. Once again, you see that animal welfare approved label, or labels that let you know that 100% organic feed was used, as in the case of the USDA organic label. I want to talk for a minute about antibiotic-free chicken, since happily it's become increasingly popular, and even large fast food companies have made commitments to sourcing antibiotic-free chicken. But a funny thing is, I think that a lot of consumers are looking for it for misguided reasons. They think that it's healthier for them personally. They're trying to ingest fewer antibiotics personally. But the truth is that the reason that you want antibiotic-free chicken is it's a public health imperative, not a personal health imperative, since non-medically essential antibiotic use in livestock has contributed to the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria strains, which ultimately could become a personal issue for each consumer. But it's really about getting these antibiotics out of the food system so that we're not contributing to antibiotic resistance overall. Anyway, so when you choose antibiotic-free chicken, you're contributing to a market shift away from a truly dangerous practice. That's great, but you want to remember that while these improvements include cleaner and somewhat more spacious conditions, most of these chickens that are raised without antibiotics are still housed in that same industrialized confined system. Chicken CAFOs are truly horrible. Those are factory farms for chicken with many of the same problems. So raised without antibiotics is a great baseline label indicating a better chicken, but it is not a best chicken. All right. Moving ourselves along to seafood. Seafood is a really tricky one, so tricky that when we launched our food label guide, we actually held the seafood labels back and launched them about 9 months later because we needed more time to parse through them. And that's labels for both wild seafood and farmed seafood. Consumers, I found, seem particularly ill-informed about seafood. Some interesting tidbit is that we decided to write a piece about canned tuna and some of the labels that you see, because we noticed that there was a whole range of labels on canned tuna and it wasn't clear what all of them were. And that piece continues to get a ton of traffic for us. It's hugely popular. And that's just canned tuna, which, according to all data, is actually on the decline consumption-wise, but there's still a lot of people eating it and a lot of confusion around it. Anyway, some of the issues we know about. We know that many fish species have been overfished to a problematic extent. We know that there are environmental concerns around habitat destruction. We know that farmed seafood has a lot of issues, a lot of antibiotics and hormones used, actually mixed in with the feed because those cramped conditions. A lot of fish farms, they're actually sort of like factory farms on land for land animals. It's a very similar environment, but in the open ocean. So there's obviously a lot of environmental concerns with that. I want to jump back to our survey for a moment because we did ask people what concerns them when they buy seafood. So they have a lot of concerns. 77.3% of them said they're worried about mercury. That does reflect how much traffic we get to our content about mercury and seafood for sure. 69.5% of them are worried about fish being raised with antibiotics and drugs, which is, as I just mentioned, a problem for farmed seafood. 67% of them are worried about where seafood came from, the country of origin, which is what that COO means. And I think it's that the message has maybe gotten out to them that the farmed seafood from overseas has some environmental and labor problems. I'm not sure, but it's a very high percentage. And 55.9% of them are worried about overfishing. So the message is getting out there about some of these critical issues with seafood. Now, there's a lot of labels on this page, and I think the confusion of this slide, it kind of, I think, reflects the noise of the market out there with labels. So those ones up top, terms, once again, that don't need to have any regulation around them. They're not necessarily certified or verified. Pole and line caught. I've noticed that a lot of, especially tinned seafood, has a lot of kind of like clip art, homemade labels that say pole caught or pole and line caught, and those are just created by like the design department of those seafood companies. They're not certified or verified labels. Sustainably caught, sustainably harvested, responsibly farmed, responsibly caught. Those are all pretty much meaningless. Down below, I have some verified and certified labels that you will see around there. On our website, we actually say that our top pick is not a label per se, but a rating system for the wild fish available at Whole Foods Market. So a little less relevant for you, more relevant to consumers. But it's interesting. They have a wild sustainable seafood system. You know, it's like a green, yellow, red kind of labeling system, though they don't sell anything with a red. And it's a combination of Marine Stewardship Council standards, MSC, and you'll see that label there, and I'll talk about it. And also the green and yellow, meaning the best labels from the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch program. Now, a lot of you might be familiar with that Seafood Watch program. They have a really great guide, including a little cardboard one you can keep in your wallet that I've actually always carried for years, including an app. But just a note about that, it's a guide to species, to fishery origin and fishing method, but it's not a label that you can put on an actual product. So it's a way for diners or shoppers like yourselves, procurers, to say, okay, we're interested in serving something that is the most sustainable. Well, we're gonna look for this particular species, you know, from the East Coast or from the West Coast. We're gonna make sure that it's pole and line caught and not caught by trawler. And Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Guide is great for that. The only problem is you have to know and trust that the information you're getting about those origins is actually correct, and that can be a bit tricky. I've been talking a bunch about organic. I did want to mention here, the USDA actually has no set standards for organic seafood. There's been a lot of conversation on the Organic Standards Board, and there are people who want there to be an organic label for seafood, but there isn't one now. So if you see seafood that's labeled organic, this means it's not from the United States. And, you know, that's fine, up to you, but just a note about that. And also that the organic standards in other countries are not exactly the same as the US ones, so you just can't make any assumptions about that. Anyway, so some good options beyond that Whole Foods labeling system. For wild fish, that's MSC label you see there, Certified Sustainable Seafood MSC. It's touted as being one of the most sustainable labels for wild caught fish. You'll see it on frozen fish. You might see it on some fresh packaged fish. What they mainly try to focus on is minimizing overfishing and protecting habitats. It's third-party certified. I will say that some hardcore sustainable seafood advocates do like to point out that it's very closely tied to the supermarket chains which supply its products. So I mentioned Whole Foods, also Walmart works closely with them. So, you know, if you want to really dig deep, some people have some qualms about that. But for farmed fish, I will say, generally, we're not fans of farmed fish for some of the reasons that I talked about. There are all different kinds of fish farms, and some are on land, for example. Some are aquaponic systems that are closed loop systems on land with fish and you know, the growing of greens, and those can be quite sustainable. And there are more and more of those popping up, but generally farms that are near shore or offshore are pretty problematic. That being said, probably the best farmed label you can find is the Farmed Responsibly ASC one, and you can read more about it on our site. It's okay. But as I said, overall, we're not huge fans of most farm fish. There are exceptions to that. Anyway, I want to move on to telling the story of your food. So let's say you've gone through the A, trouble, and B, expense of procuring food that keeps animal welfare in mind, worker welfare in mind, environmental sustainability in mind. You want to let your customers know that you've sourced ingredients that meet their values. There's an opportunity not just to have yourself stand out from other establishments, but also to be part of this education that I hope I've demonstrated is so badly needed. So you can learn yourselves, and then you can help tell that story to your customers. So there's obviously a lot of opportunities to do this beyond the Portlandia joke of servers over explaining the origins of things tableside. You can tell the story of your food on your website. You can explain which farms you get your food from and what certifications they have, if any, on your menu. One thing I do want to mention is I think we all know that a lot of this signaling, this like farm to table signaling, can be disingenuous and can prey on the fact that customers aren't particularly informed. And also that they're sort of forced to believe whatever you tell them. So I think it's important for me to say here that it is important to be truthful and to speak with integrity about what you're doing, and that there are educational opportunities in telling the truth. So in saying we strive to be a local seasonal restaurant, and that means that, you know, from May to October or whatever it is, we source X and Y and Z from here. In the winter, we shift our purchasing because of availability. I think that's like a very powerful thing that you can do for your customers, is be honest with them and say, we trust you with this information, and we want you to be as informed as we are, and to know, like, be honest about the fact, you know, maybe it's March and we're serving asparagus. It's because asparagus is now available in the Southeast. We wanted you to be able to test this, you know, taste this beautiful product. And so we are bringing it up from Georgia. Come May, we will have local asparagus that we can serve you. It's a pretty great thing you can do for your customers. So I wanted to end on that note, that I think you have an opportunity and maybe also a responsibility here to tell an authentic and integrity-filled story about where your food comes from and be part of this consumer education that we feel is so important. Thanks so much.
Jerusha, that was amazing. Thank you so much for the time. I think that we all learned a lot today. I know I did, at least. Let's turn it over to some questions here. Let's go to the crowd to see if we have any questions. Please definitely direct any questions to the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar. We have a question here. Jerusha, you didn't mention dairy. Do you have any guidelines or thoughts about dairy labels?
Yes, we definitely do. I mentioned we have some deep dive reports on our site. We have a really good, I think, about 25-page report on dairy, but I can also give you the quick and dirty, which is when it comes to dairy, organic obviously is becoming an increasingly big part of the market. And I would say an increasingly big part of a diminishing market. I think we all know that the milk market is shrinking. People are looking to alternative plant-based milks, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So organic dairy is from cows who aren't given growth hormones or antibiotics. They're only given organic feed. They are given some time to roam on pasture. But just a caveat, doesn't necessarily mean they're from, you know, a small green farm or whatever. Industrial organic is something that's increasingly a part of the market. And so you just have to, you know, keep your eyes wide open about what it means that it's organic. It means the things that I said, but it doesn't mean, you know, a bucolic farm in the country necessarily. But I talked a bit earlier about grass-fed. Grass-fed is something that doesn't only pertain to meat, it also pertains to dairy. And there are some really good grass-fed dairy labels out there, including a pretty new certified grass-fed organic label, livestock program label that was spearheaded by, I think, Organic Valley and Maple Hill Creamery. And it's a really good label, and totally think you should look for grass-fed dairy if and when you can.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Now we have some questions from some other members here. We have one from Jason. He says, how can we as chefs get our ownership to understand the importance of menu integrity? Any suggestions that'll help us get our message across any better?
Oh, that is such a good question. And it like both really cheers me and also breaks my heart that you have to make the case for that with your owners. I mean, there's the fear tactic, which is, I'm sure you all know, there are a couple of sort of devastating investigative journalistic pieces in the past couple of years that kind of exposed restaurants for lying about these things. And I think those establishments ended up looking pretty pathetic. I don't really like to go with the stick. I like to go with the carrot. I'm just going to repeat myself here, but I think if you go with you know, we will look better if we're honest message that I was talking about at the end, like, I think I'm a pretty informed consumer, and I'm just so blown away when restaurants are really honest with me about their sourcing and saying, when possible, we do this. It's January, we're doing that. I feel so grateful for that honesty, and it makes me trust everything. Otherwise, frankly, I'm looking at everything kind of suspect. But I think if you can convey how meaningful that is to consumers to feel like you trust them and you're being honest with them, hopefully that could help. But it's a real issue.
Yeah, it's definitely a significant struggle, just having an aligned viewpoint with ownership and just trying to figure out the common denominator there. We have another question here from Melinda. Do you have any materials that a regular customer can share with their local grocer in hopes that they stock their products?
That a customer can share with a grocer to say, this is a product I'm interested in? I think that's,
yes.
Yeah.
I think that's the question as well.
We don't have any sort of handouts or materials. We do have a section of our site called Shopping Sustainably, and there's kind of like a drop-down menu there where you can pick like, okay, I want to shop sustainably at, here are questions I can ask my grocer. Here are questions I can ask my fishmonger. And there's stuff there with a little bit of guidance around basically saying, the management at your supermarket, like you can reach out to them, you can talk to them. If you tell them, I want you to stock more local options, I want you to stock more organic options, they are listening. That's what they're there for. They want to move product off the shelves. So we have a little bit of guidance there for consumers on questions you can ask of farmers, fishmongers, your server at your restaurant, on our Dining Sustainably page, and also your supermarket manager.
Great. And looks like we have one last question from Jordan. He asks, what if my supplier doesn't provide this information? Is there somewhere I can find it? I think what he's talking about is as a restaurant, if he's ordering from, a large supplier like a Cisco or US Foods that might not provide this information that's readily available, where can it be found?
You know what? I don't really know the answer to that, but I want to know the answer to that. And so I'm going to look into that. I'm curious to know, and that I don't know this and we're not in like a back and forth here, but I am curious to know as the market share increases on this stuff, if these companies are feeling more pressure to give you more of that information but I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to find it out and get back to Market Man with that.
Sounds great. Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, looks like that will be all for today then. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. We hope that you all learned something and really enjoyed the content. We will be in touch soon with the next iteration of our webinar series. Due to overwhelming demand, we might even be repeating a lot of this same content from the past couple of weeks and expanding upon it. So stay tuned for that. Look out for those emails. And thanks so much for joining today. Have a great day.
Thanks.